Long before modern content moderation, developers could upload almost anything they wanted. Some games pushed boundaries with dark humor, others crossed lines that many people believed should never have been crossed. Number 1. Kindergarten Killer. When people talk about the most controversial Flash games ever made, Kindergarten Killer is often one of the first names mentioned. The game became infamous not because it was especially popular or well-designed, but because of its shocking premise. During the early days of Flash gaming, many developers tried to attract attention by creating content that pushed boundaries. Kindergarten Killer was one of the most extreme examples of that trend. The game placed players in a school setting and revolved around causing chaos. Even at the time, many internet users felt the concept crossed a line. Unlike action games that took place in fictional worlds or involved fantasy enemies, this game used a setting associated with young children. That alone was enough to make it highly controversial. What made the situation worse was that the game seemed designed primarily to shock people. More discussions about it focused on its disturbing subject matter rather than its gameplay. Very few people praised it as a good game. Instead, it became known for the controversy surrounding it. Critics argued that games like Kindergarten Killer normalized disturbing scenarios and treated serious subjects as entertainment. Parents and advocacy groups were especially vocal in their criticism. They believed that content involving violence in schools should never be presented in a game, even as dark humor or satire. Number 2. Mass Mayhem. Compared to some of the other games on this list, Mass Mayhem was very different. It was not based on a real tragedy, nor did it focus on a specific controversial event. Instead, it became famous because of its extreme focus on destruction. Mass Mayhem was one of the most recognizable Flash action games of its era. Players were given access to a wide range of weapons, explosives, and vehicles. The objective was simple: create as much destruction as possible. The game's fast pace and over-the-top action helped it gain a large audience, and it eventually spawned several sequels. What made Mass Mayhem stand out was how heavily it rewarded chaos. Many Flash games included combat or action elements, but Mass Mayhem? It placed destruction at the center of the entire experience. Players earned rewards by creating larger explosions, causing more damage, and completing increasingly destructive objectives. Supporters of the game argued that it was clearly exaggerated and unrealistic. The visuals were cartoonish, and many players viewed it as nothing more than a chaotic action game. To them, it was similar to watching an over-the-top action movie where the destruction was so exaggerated that it was difficult to take seriously. Critics saw things differently. Some argued that the game represented a shift toward more extreme content within Flash gaming. They believed that developers were competing to create bigger explosions, more violence, and more shocking scenarios simply to attract attention. Number 3. VTech Rampage. Few Flash games generated as much backlash as VTech Rampage. The game was released shortly after the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007, a tragedy that shocked the United States and received extensive media coverage around the world. What immediately made the game controversial was its connection to a real event. Rather than creating a fictional scenario, the developer loosely recreated elements inspired by the shooting, because the tragedy was still fresh in the public's memory. Many people felt the game crossed a major ethical line. The timing played a huge role in the backlash. Families were still grieving, communities were still processing what had happened, and news coverage remained widespread. For many people, turning such a recent tragedy into a game felt deeply inappropriate. News outlets quickly picked up the story, bringing attention to the game far beyond normal gaming communities. As media coverage increased, criticism grew even stronger. Many commentators accused the developer of exploiting a national tragedy simply to gain publicity. The game soon became one of the most heavily criticized Flash titles ever released. Politicians, journalists, parents, and advocacy groups all condemned it. Even many gamers who normally defended controversial content felt uncomfortable with the subject matter. Number 4. The Slaying of Sandy Hook Elementary. Among all the controversial Flash games ever released, many people consider The Slaying of Sandy Hook Elementary to be one of the most shocking. Unlike fictional games that relied on fantasy violence or exaggerated action, this title referenced a real tragedy that remained deeply painful for many people across the United States. The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012 was one of the deadliest school tragedies in American history. The event resulted in the deaths of young children and educators, leaving families and communities devastated. Because of the scale of the tragedy and the age of the victims, it became one of the most emotionally sensitive events of the modern era. When people discovered that a game referencing the tragedy existed, outrage followed almost immediately. Many internet users could not believe that someone had created entertainment based on such a recent and painful event. The game quickly spread across social media and online forums, but most of the attention was negative. What made the backlash especially severe was the fact that the victims were very young children. For many people, this crossed a line that should never have been approached. Even individuals who normally defended controversial games often argued that this particular title went too far. While some believed developers should have freedom of expression, they felt that turning a tragedy involving children into a game was impossible to justify. Critics argued that the game served no meaningful purpose beyond generating shock and controversy. Unlike historical documentaries, educational projects, or discussions about important events, the game appeared to many observers as an attempt to gain attention through outrage. Number 5. Kaboom! The Suicide Bomber Game. Kaboom! The Suicide Bomber game became controversial for a different reason. Rather than focusing on a specific tragedy, the game used terrorism as the foundation of its concept. During the early years of internet gaming, many developers attempted to attract attention through offensive humor, and Kaboom became one of the most well-known examples. The game revolved around causing explosions in public areas. Its presentation relied heavily on dark comedy and shock value. While some players viewed it as an attempt at edgy humor, many others saw it as deeply offensive. The timing of the game's release played a major role in the criticism it received. During the 2000s, concerns about terrorism remained extremely high around the world. News coverage frequently focused on terrorist attacks, security threats, and ongoing military conflicts. Because these issues were still affecting real people, many critics believed the game's subject matter was inappropriate. Opponents argued that the game trivialized real-world suffering. They believed it reduced serious events involving loss of life into a form of entertainment. For families who had been directly affected by terrorism, the idea of turning such topics into a game felt insensitive and disrespectful. Supporters sometimes claimed that the game was simply another example of dark internet humor. However, that defense did little to reduce criticism. For many observers, the issue was not whether the game was intended as a joke. The issue was that the joke itself centered on subjects that had caused genuine pain and loss. The controversy surrounding Kaboom also reflected the culture of the internet during the Flash era. At the time, some developers competed to create increasingly shocking games because controversy often generated attention. The more offensive a game appeared, the more likely people were to talk about it. Number 6. 9/11 Tower Jumper. If there is one Flash game that perfectly represents the lack of timing during the early internet era, it is 9/11 Tower Jumper. The game referenced the September 11 attacks, one of the most traumatic events in modern history. Even years after the attacks, the memory remained painful for survivors, victims' families, and millions of people around the world. The attacks had a lasting impact on American society and global politics. Thousands of people lost their lives, and countless families were affected forever. Because of this, many people viewed the subject as something that deserved respect and sensitivity. When 9/11 Tower Jumper appeared online, it immediately attracted criticism. Many users were shocked that such a game had been created at all. Rather than treating the event as a historical tragedy, the game transformed it into a form of entertainment, something that many people considered unacceptable. Critics argued that the game was disrespectful to victims and survivors. They believed it turned a moment of enormous human suffering into a joke. For families who had lost loved ones during the attacks, the existence of the game felt particularly offensive. The controversy sparked intense debates across the internet. Some people defended the game under the idea of free expression, while others argued that certain subjects should not be turned into games. The disagreement highlighted broader questions about where freedom of creativity should end and social responsibility should begin.